America built more amusement parks per capita than any other country on Earth, and then quietly stopped maintaining a significant number of them. What's left behind are roller coasters rusting in the weeds, empty midways, and Ferris wheels that haven't turned in decades. These are the 10 biggest abandoned amusement parks in America. Number 10, Libertyland, Memphis, Tennessee. Libertyland opened in Memphis in 1976 as part of the city's celebration of the American Bicentennial. Built on the fairgrounds that had hosted the Mid-South Fair for decades, and it managed to run for nearly 30 years before finally closing in 2005. At its peak, the park covered around 13 acres and offered a range of rides and attractions that were never exactly world-class, but served the Memphis market well enough. It was a regional park with regional ambitions, which meant it could be a reliable summer destination for families in the Mid-South without competing directly with the major chains. The park's most notable attraction was the Grand Carousel, an antique merry-go-round that dated to 1909 and had been operating at the Memphis Fairgrounds for most of the 20th century, lovingly maintained through multiple ownership changes and park renovations. It was also associated, in Memphis mythology, with Elvis Presley, who reportedly rented the park privately after hours on multiple occasions during his years of fame specifically to ride his favorite attraction, the Grand Carousel, in the kind of privacy that comes with owning enough money to rent a theme park for yourself. The park closed when the Mid-South Fair organization that operated it ran out of funding and could no longer justify the capital expenditure needed to keep aging infrastructure competitive with the newer regional parks and national chains drawing from the same market. The decision to close was made in 2005, and the announcement was met with the kind of nostalgic grief that attaches to institutions that served multiple generations of a city's family life. Petitions were circulated, local news ran retrospective segments, former employees and longtime visitors came out for a final season that felt more like a farewell party than an amusement park visit. The rides were sold off at auction, including the Grand Carousel, which was eventually relocated and restored to operational status at a new facility. The fairgrounds property itself remained in municipal hands and became the subject of a lengthy and contentious planning process about what a city does with a large parcel of urban land that used to be a beloved institution. It was eventually redeveloped into Tiger Lane, a tailgating area adjacent to Liberty Bowl Memorial Stadium that serves football crowds and event traffic rather than summer families. The actual Libertyland footprint no longer exists in any recognizable form. It was one of those amusement parks that got erased rather than simply abandoned, which in its own way is a more complete kind of disappearance than the dramatic overgrown ruins of parks that were left standing. There is nothing left to photograph, nothing left to explore, nothing to mark where the carousel stood. Number 9, Joyland, Wichita, Kansas. Joyland. Amusement park operated in Wichita, Kansas from 1949 to 2004, a run of 55 years that makes it one of the longer-lived regional amusement parks in the Midwest before its final closure. The park was built by the Ottaway family, who continued to operate it as a family business across multiple generations, and it held a specific place in Wichita's social geography as the accessible, locally owned alternative to the corporate chains. A place where generations of the same family had their first roller coaster experiences, their first summer jobs, their first dates. The park's signature attraction was a wooden roller coaster called the Roller Coaster, which had been running since 1949 and was considered one of the last surviving examples of classic wooden coaster construction in the Great Plains region. The park also featured a classic carousel, a dark ride called Ghost Town, and a miniature train that circumnavigated the park's perimeter. The standard equipment of a mid-century regional amusement park maintained with family pride and a limited maintenance budget that became increasingly apparent as the years went on. The park closed after the 2004 season. The combination of deferred maintenance costs, declining attendance through the 1990s and early 2000s, and the deaths of key Ottaway family members making continued operation untenable for the surviving family. keeping an independently owned amusement park competitive with corporate chain parks operating within driving distance had become increasingly impossible for operators without deep capital reserves, and Joyland had been running on the momentum of its established reputation for years before the closure finally came. The property sat abandoned for years afterward, the wooden roller coaster deteriorating significantly and becoming a popular subject for urban explorers and photographers, documenting the collapse of classic American amusement infrastructure. The roller coaster was not fenced particularly effectively in its early abandonment years, and a combination of weather, deliberate vandalism, and the structural vulnerabilities inherent in aging wooden coaster construction reduced it steadily from a recognizable attraction to a leaning, increasingly unstable skeleton. Periodic revival attempts were made by various investors over the years following closure, none of which reached completion, despite occasional announcements that suggested genuine momentum. As of the mid-2020s, the site has been cleared and redeveloped for other purposes. The roller coaster demolished, another regional institution absorbed into the ongoing renegotiation of what American leisure looks like and who gets to decide what gets preserved. Number 8. Wild World/Six Flags, America predecessor. Adventure World historical context. Lake Winnepesaukah, Rossville, Georgia. Lake Winnepesaukah, known locally simply as Winnie, is technically not abandoned, but the portions of its original footprint that have been retired and left in place over the decades of the park's operation represent one of the more interesting cases of partial abandonment in American regional amusement history. The park opened in 1925 on the shores of Lake Winnepesaukah on Lookout Mountain in Georgia, and has operated continuously since, making it one of the oldest continuously operating amusement parks in the United States. What makes Winnie relevant to this list is what has been left behind within and around its operating footprint over the century of its existence. Old ride foundations, retired infrastructure, and the remains of attractions that were removed but not fully cleared away sit alongside functioning rides in a way that gives the park an archaeological quality unusual even for long-lived regional parks. The lakeside setting, the wooden boardwalk sections dating to the park's early decades, and the original 1920s bathhouse that still stands on the property create a layered landscape of operating park and preserved ruin. The park's survival itself is the remarkable thing. It has navigated the consolidation of the amusement industry, the rise of the corporate theme park chains, hurricane damage, and the general economic pressures that have closed hundreds of comparable regional parks since the 1970s. Park historian and regional amusement industry writer Jim Futrell has noted that Winnie represents the best remaining example of the lakeside amusement park format that dominated American leisure from the 1890s through the 1930s. A format that has otherwise almost entirely disappeared. Its partial ruins and its operating present exist side by side on the same grounds, which is a more honest account of what a century of amusement park history actually looks like than any fully restored historic site could provide. Number 7. Pontchartrain Beach Amusement Park, New Orleans, Louisiana. Pontchartrain Beach, amusement park operated on the southern shore of Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans from 1928 to 1983, and it is one of the more significant casualties of both urban leisure history and the complex racial geography of mid-20th century New Orleans. The park was segregated for most of its operating life, with black visitors restricted to a designated area called the Lincoln Beach section until the Civil Rights era, a history that the park's legacy carries whether it's discussed or not. At its peak, Pontchartrain Beach was the largest amusement park in the Gulf South, covering roughly 30 acres of lakefront property and featuring a full complement of major rides, including the Zephyr wooden roller coaster, a log flume, a dark ride, a carousel, and a substantial midway. The Zephyr was considered one of the finest wooden coasters of its era and was a landmark of New Orleans leisure culture for decades. The park also featured the Babbitt Brothers Bathing Beach, drawing swimmers to the lake during the decades before the lake's water quality declined to the point where swimming became inadvisable. The park closed in 1983 as attendance declined through the 1970s and early 1980s, and the property's lakefront location made commercial redevelopment significantly more attractive than continued amusement operations in a market that was consolidating around fewer, larger regional parks. The rides were sold off or demolished. The site was cleared over several years. Hurricane Katrina's storm surge in August 2005 inundated the former park property, and the subsequent decade-long redevelopment of the New Orleans lakefront has removed virtually every trace of what was once the recreational centerpiece of the city. A small concession stand building and some concrete foundations survived Katrina in the general area, but the park itself is gone in every meaningful sense. What remains is primarily in photographs, in the memories of New Orleanians of a certain age who treat the park's name as a kind of generational marker, and in the Zephyr roller coaster's documented legacy. The Zephyr was designed by Harry Baker and Frederick Church and opened in 1939. It was demolished in 1983 when the park closed, but had been photographed and measured extensively enough to be considered one of the better documented examples of late Golden Age wooden coaster design. Several former Pontchartrain Beach employees and longtime visitors have contributed oral histories to Louisiana Preservation Archives, which represent the primary ongoing record of what the park meant to New Orleans across the 5 decades it operated. The racial history of the park's segregated era has received increasing scholarly attention in recent years as part of a broader reckoning with the civil rights geography of Gulf South public spaces. Number 6. Hard Times USA, Lincoln Park, Dartmouth, Massachusetts. Lincoln Park was a regional amusement park in Dartmouth, Massachusetts on the South Coast, operating from 1894 to 1987, a run of 93 years that made it one of the oldest amusement parks in New England before its closure. The park developed from a 19th-century trolley park, built at the end of a streetcar line to generate weekend ridership, and evolved through the 20th century into a full-scale amusement operation featuring a wooden roller coaster called the Comet, a carousel, a dark ride, a funhouse, and the full range of midway attractions standard to the regional park format. The Comet, which opened in 1947, was designed by Herbert Schmeck, one of the most respected roller coaster designers of the mid-20th century, and the man responsible for several other classic wooden coasters still operating at parks across the country. The Lincoln Park Comet was considered a regional landmark and a solid example of Schmeck's design philosophy, a smooth, sustained ride that prioritized the experience over brute force height or speed. It operated for 40 years before the park closed. The park's closure in 1987 was attributed to a combination of deferred maintenance, declining attendance through the early 1980s, and the growing difficulty of ensuring aging wooden attractions at a time when liability exposure was becoming a primary concern for small regional operators who lacked the legal and financial infrastructure of the major chains. The decision to close was not dramatic. There was no single catastrophic event, no bankruptcy filing, no public battle over the park's future. The season simply ended. The gates didn't reopen the following spring, and that was effectively that. The property sat abandoned afterward, the Comet deteriorating in place through the 1990s and 2000s, drawing urban explorers from across New England who documented its collapse through photographs and video that circulated through early internet preservation communities. The coaster was eventually demolished, and the property has gone through various ownership changes and planning stages for redevelopment without reaching a completed outcome for the full site. Several local preservation advocates attempted to organize campaigns to save the Comet structure in its final years, without success. What Lincoln Park represented, the trolley park tradition that shaped American regional leisure for the first half of the 20th century, the Schmeck design heritage, the specific New England working-class coastal amusement culture, is now almost entirely gone from the physical landscape, surviving primarily in the oral histories of the families who went there every summer for decades, and in the photographs of what it looked like while it was falling down. Number 5. Opryland USA, Nashville, Tennessee. Opryland USA is the most commercially successful park on this list and possibly the most mourned because it was not closed due to financial failure. It was deliberately demolished by a profitable corporation that decided the land it sat on was worth more as retail space than as a theme park, which is the kind of decision that makes sense on a spreadsheet and produces a specific quality of regional fury that hasn't fully subsided decades later. The park opened in 1972 on the outskirts of Nashville as a musical theme park, a concept that organized its entertainment around American music genres, including country, bluegrass, gospel, and rock and roll, set within themed areas designed around those musical traditions. The park was owned by Gaylord Entertainment, the same company that operated the Grand Ole Opry and the Opryland hotel complex nearby, and at its peak, attracted around 2 million visitors annually, making it a significant driver of Nashville tourism and one of the most successful regional theme parks in the American South. Gaylord Entertainment announced the park's closure in 1997, converting the site into the Opry Mills Shopping Mall, which opened in 2000. The demolition of a profitable, well-attended theme park to build a shopping mall was received in Nashville with a level of public outcry that produced organized protests, formal petitions submitted to city council, and a sustained low-grade civic grievance that has continued ever since. The protest was not merely sentimental. Opryland had been a genuine cultural institution, housing live country music performances and serving as an anchor for Nashville's entertainment identity in a way that no shopping mall could replicate. Former park employees, former visitors, and local historians have maintained archives, websites, and social media communities dedicated to documenting Opryland's history, creating one of the more active parks preservation communities in American theme park history for a park that no longer physically exists. The Opry Mills Mall itself was significantly damaged in the Nashville flood of 2010, which many local observers noted with the specific satisfaction of people who had been told that commerce made more sense than a theme park. The mall was eventually repaired and continues to operate. The Opryland Hotel nearby, which was also severely damaged in the same flood, was rebuilt. The footprint where the theme park stood is entirely unrecognizable from the ground. Journalist and Nashville native Tony Gonzalez, writing about the park's legacy in a retrospective piece for a regional publication, described the closure as the moment Nashville decided it wanted to be a destination rather than a place, which is either a sharp observation about the city's transformation into a national entertainment destination or an unfair reading of a real estate business decision, depending on how you weigh roller coasters against hotel rooms. Either way, Opryland is gone, and the conversation about what Nashville traded for what is still going on. Number 4. Geauga Lake, Aurora, Ohio. Geauga Lake has the distinction of being one of the longest-running amusement parks in American history. It operated in some form from 1887 to 2007, a span of 120 years, and its closure represents one of the cleaner examples of corporate mismanagement converting a successful regional institution into a failed large-scale theme park and then abandoning it entirely. The park operated as a successful regional attraction through most of the 20th century, located in the Western Reserve area of Northeast Ohio between Cleveland and Youngstown, drawing multi-generational family loyalty in a region that took regional amusement parks seriously. Its signature attraction was the Big Dipper wooden roller coaster, which dated to 1925 and was one of the older surviving wooden coasters in the country by the time the park closed. The park was acquired by Cedar Fair, the large amusement park chain, in 1995, and what followed was a misadventure in expansion and market miscalculation. Cedar Fair expanded Geauga Lake aggressively through the late 1990s and early 2000s, adding major thrill rides and investing heavily in attempting to compete directly with Cedar Point, the company's flagship park, about 90 miles away on Lake Erie. The strategy of turning a beloved, moderately sized regional park into a full-scale destination resort competing with one of the most famous amusement parks in the world, while owned by the same company, was internally contradictory in ways that became financially apparent quickly. Attendance never reached targets. Cedar Fair stripped the rides out of the main park in 2007 and converted it to a water park-only operation, which lasted until 2016 when the entire site was sold. The property has since been purchased for residential and mixed-use development. The Big Dipper, which had been operating for 82 years when the park closed, was demolished. Number 3. Chippewa Lake Park, Medina County, Ohio. Chippewa Lake Park operated in Medina County, Ohio from 1878 to 1978, exactly 100 years, and then was abandoned so completely and so quickly that the rides were simply left in place, which created over the following decades one of the most documented and most atmospheric abandoned amusement park sites in the country. The park sat on the shores of Chippewa Lake, which provided both the recreational draw and the scenic setting that made it a regional destination throughout its century of operation. At its peak, the park featured a wooden roller coaster called the Big Dipper, which dated to 1925, a funhouse, a dark ride, a carousel, paddle boats on the lake, and a substantial dance hall that was a destination in its own right during the big band era of the 1930s and 1940s. The park drew visitors from across Northeast Ohio and was a consistent summer presence for the region's working-class and middle-class families through the post-World War II boom years. Declining attendance through the 1970s, combined with ownership changes and deferred maintenance, led to the park's closure after the 1978 season. What makes Chippewa Lake unique among the entries on this list is the degree to which the abandonment was absolute and prolonged. The ride stayed, the dance hall stayed, the roller coaster stayed, the carousel building stayed, with the carousel mechanism still inside it. For roughly 2 decades after the 1978 closure, the site sat largely untouched and increasingly overgrown, with the wooden roller coaster slowly losing structural integrity as rain, snow, and vegetation did the work that dismantling crews never came to do. The dance hall, which had been a significant venue for regional big band entertainment during the 1930s and 1940s, still had its dance floor inside. Old promotional materials and decorations remained in the concession buildings. It was the kind of place that felt less like a closed business and more like a community that had simply stepped out for a moment about 20 years ago. The property became one of the earliest serious urban exploration subjects in American amusement park photography, documented extensively by photographers and writers in the 1990s and 2000s who recognized the unusual completeness of the abandonment. The roller coaster was demolished after a portion of it collapsed around 2016, and the property has been cleared for residential development in the years since. The photographs that documented Chippewa Lake's decades of overgrown abandonment, the coaster's wooden structure slowly tilting into the trees, the carousel horses still inside their building covered in dust and cobwebs, the dance hall floor visible through broken windows, remain some of the most widely reproduced images in the American amusement park decay genre, circulated across urban exploration communities and preservation advocacy groups as a specific kind of evidence about what America leaves behind. Number 2. Hard Times Revisited, Rockaway's Playland, Rockaway Beach, New York. Rockaway's Playland operated at Rockaway Beach in Queens, New York from 1901 to 1987, and its location on the Rockaway Peninsula, a narrow barrier island accessible from Brooklyn and Queens, but retaining a beach town distinctness that set it apart from the rest of New York City, gave it a particular character among American amusement parks. Rockaway Beach was, for generations of New York working-class families, the accessible summer escape, close enough to reach by subway, cheap enough to spend a day at without significant financial planning, and offering both the beach and the amusement park in combination. At its peak, the park featured several roller coasters, a dark ride, a funhouse, a carousel, and a substantial boardwalk midway backed directly against the beach. The Atom Smasher roller coaster, which opened in 1937, was the park's signature thrill attraction and one of the larger wooden coasters in the New York metropolitan area during its operating decades. The park drew enormous crowds from Brooklyn and Queens during summer weekends through the post-war period, and it was the kind of place that formed the specific summer memories of a generation of New Yorkers who grew up within a subway ride of the beach. For families in Brooklyn and Queens without the money or the time for longer trips, Rockaway's Playland was the full package. The ocean, the boardwalk, the roller coaster, the Midway Games, the Salt Air, all accessible via the A train without a car or an overnight stay. The park's closure in 1987 reflected both the general difficulties facing older regional parks in the late 1980s, as the amusement industry consolidated, and smaller operators found it increasingly impossible to fund the capital improvements needed to stay competitive, and the specific challenges of operating an aging, maintenance-intensive waterfront amusement park on one of the most expensive pieces of coastal real estate in the world. The site was eventually cleared, and the boardwalk area has been through several rounds of redevelopment. Hurricane Sandy in 2012 significantly altered the Rockaway Peninsula's physical landscape and prompted another wave of coastal redevelopment that has further erased whatever physical traces remained of the park's footprint. What Rockaway's Playland represented, the democratic, accessible leisure culture of mid-century New York, the working-class beach day that didn't require a car, the subway ride to the roller coaster with the whole family on a Saturday in July, belongs to a version of New York City that has been substantially revised by economics, real estate, and time. The specific experience of taking the A train to Rockaway with $5 in your pocket and spending the whole day is a memory that belongs to millions of people and to no physical place that currently exists. Number 1. Six Flags, New Orleans, Louisiana. Six Flags, New Orleans was the largest amusement park in Louisiana when it opened in 2000 as Jazzland, a locally conceived theme park on the eastern edge of New Orleans that was intended to capture a share of the city's substantial tourism economy. The park covered over 140 acres along the Chef Montour Highway, featured 14 major rides including 4 roller coasters, and was built at a cost of around $150 million. It was, for about 5 years, a functioning regional theme park serving southern Louisiana and the Gulf Coast. Six Flags acquired the park in 2002, rebranding it as Six Flags New Orleans and adding additional attractions and corporate investment. The expanded park was drawing over 1 million visitors annually by the mid-2000s, and while it never became one of the chain's premier properties, it was operating at a level that suggested a viable, if modest, future as a regional attraction. Then, Hurricane Katrina made landfall on August 29, 2005, and the park was placed under 6 to 8 feet of standing water for over a month. The flood damage was catastrophic and comprehensive. Every electrical system, every mechanical component, every wooden structure, every ride control system was submerged and essentially destroyed by the prolonged immersion in contaminated water. Six Flags filed for bankruptcy in 2009, listed the park as an asset and wrote it down, and walked away, leaving the property behind without completing any meaningful remediation or demolition. The New Orleans City Council has been in legal dispute with Six Flags and subsequent property owners over the remediation costs ever since. As of the early 2020s, the park has sat 140 acres of rusting roller coasters, decaying ride infrastructure, and collapsing buildings, visible from the highway and documented obsessively by urban explorers for nearly 2 decades. The Joker roller coaster's orange track against the Louisiana sky is one of the more persistently photographed images in American abandonment photography. Plans for redevelopment of the site have been announced and failed multiple times. The park remains exactly where Katrina left it, which in a city with as many unresolved post-storm grievances as New Orleans carries a particular weight that goes well beyond the question of what to do with 140 acres of broken amusement equipment. Every one of these parks was someone's summer, someone's first ride, someone's annual tradition. When they closed, they took a specific kind of shared experience with them that doesn't get rebuilt by whatever comes next. If this one meant something to you, hit like and subscribe. There's more where this came from.